My name is Jerm. This is Jerm Warfare, the battle of ideas. It is a great pleasure to be joined in the trenches by the founder of Bastyon, Daniel, aka Daniel. Thank you. Listen, I hope you don't mind. I'm having a Jack Daniels because it's evening.
Love it.
I'm also having a Jack Daniels to celebrate the brilliant work that you and your team have been doing. What is Bastyon?
Bastyon is a very simply, at a very kind of first approximation, is a social network, but it's much deeper than that. It's actually a protocol. It's a way to say no to the big tech social media, and in fact, any corporate spawned social media, it's a way to own your social network. I mean, quite literally, when you're on Bastyon, let's say you're a blogger, you own all the subscribers because they're on the blockchain, they're yours. There's no corporation behind it. There's no intellectual property, so anybody could make a copy of it. So it's in a public domain. So it's really the antithesis of everything that corporate social media stands for. And we know that these corporate social media platforms, they start out very, very nice. I like to use the analogy of Gremlins. It's a kind of old school, who remembers that movie, but they start out very nice and furry. They give you a lot.
I remember the movie.
Facebook in early days, you just get, it's furry and it's nice, and then so on. All of a sudden, midnight strikes or whatever, or a drop of water, and now they turn like evil, like they just take it back. Yeah, exactly. So
I want to watch that again.
You're all of a sudden your subscribers are not only like you have to pay money to reach your subscribers possibly, but now all of a sudden you have to, all of a sudden there's like they tell you what medicines to take, they tell you what to put into your body, they tell you what to think, they tell you what to believe, they tell you what you cannot believe. And if you disobey, and so on. So, we'll talk about that. But the corporate social media, or traditional social media, it's not that way by accident. People keep thinking that it's Mark Zuckerberg, it's Jack Dorsey, no, it is not. It's actually fundamentally that way. And with Bastyon is fundamentally different. It's not like, let's make a copy of Facebook, but the good guys will run it. That doesn't work. In the corporate world, it doesn't matter if the guys or gals are good. It matters who the owners are, who the board of directors is, who the investors are, and they will control the thing if it gets big enough, and there's nothing you can do about it. Right? So we wanted to build something that cannot be bought, that is no intellectual property. Anybody could clone it, fork it, so you could have different versions of it completely legally. Basically open source code, no corporate structure, and with an internal kind of financial system, if you will, because it has internal cryptocurrency. It's on blockchain, so it doesn't depend as a blogger. The vision is that you don't depend on PayPal or Patreon, and so Bastyon has no corporate entity, no bank account. It also doesn't depend on JP Morgan Chase or PayPal or whatever. It just lives as its own kind of universe. So it is a platform that is open sourced, that is also has its own financial system to incentivize, let's say, bloggers. And our goal is not to create a competitor to one of these, Facebooks and Twitters and so on, but to actually offer some completely different path to people and say, you know what, how many times you're going to get burned, right? Facebook once upon a time was supposedly for freedom. Twitter, Jack Dorsey said something like, if there was a free speech wing of the free speech party, Twitter would be it, right? That's what he said. So like extremists for freedom, whatever. But you know what? It doesn't matter what Jack thinks or whatever. Things turn out differently. We want to put together something, and we're building it, and you're using it, and lots of people using it. Something that plays by completely different rules.
So for the uninitiated, it's essentially an alternative to Twitter, but it's decentralized and with it has a focus on freedom of speech and security.
That's right, but it also has a strong video component now that's been developing, and you could also say it's an alternative to YouTube in many ways. Especially the next release, there'll be more ways to find content that's interesting to you. So there's a lot of video being loaded, a lot of so it's growing in that way too. So it's not quite. It has a microblogging element, but it's got a video element. It's got also long articles. You can actually do long blogs, almost like Medium. So it's a pretty well-rounded platform that can cater to many different needs.
I'm also a little bit biased because I jumped onto it last year. I can't remember how I came across it, but it was called Pocketnet at the time. What happened with the name?
Well, I love the name personally, but a lot of people, actually some bigger bloggers told us that, the name, you should have a more catchy name. Pocketnet sounds like a technology, which it is, but it doesn't give any understanding of the vision, right? I disagree. I think Pocketnet it is a vision that it's an internet in your pocket, as opposed to you being in the pocket of the internet. But we came up with Bastyon because, in a sense, the things are moving so swiftly. When we started Bastyon, we knew that freedom would be curtailed. We knew that censorship would be ubiquitous, but things are moving so swiftly. We're like, well, we can see a time where this is going to be the last bastion of the free speech. We hope it doesn't get there. We're here so it doesn't get there, and you're doing things so we don't get there. But hence the name Bastyon. I think it went over very well, but it's Bastyon with a Y, so it's not Bastion. It's Bastyon with a Y.
Yeah, one of the things that keeps coming up though is like, okay, but you've got Gab and you've got Getter and you've got I can't think of the what else? What else is there? But you know what I mean. You've got
Rumble is the video platform, I think, right?
But
you have BitChute.
They're all they're all centralized. So what is this? What is this definition? Decentralization. What does it mean?
Yeah. So exactly. Let's get to the point. Exactly what it means is to us, right? If you're into crypto, you understand that basically the Bitcoin is the core model that we follow. So meaning that there is no corporation. The code is open. The code is in the public domain, meaning that it's distributed under a license that can be used by anybody. So Bastyon is using Apache license. So decentralized, now going into the next steps, the technology must be decentralized when it's run on completely equal network of nodes. And I will explain that. So nodes are computers around the world, like Bitcoin, right? Basically, it's run on computers around the world. And they must be equal in the sense of that there's no like preferred, for example, well, these three nodes control everything. Like there's in cryptocurrency, for example, Ripple, right? Or something like that. Those are crypto systems. They're very powerful, but they have computers that are, let's say, if we use Orwell's language, more equal than others, right? In here, in Bastyon or in Bitcoin, all computers are equal. So the network runs on computers around the world. So decentralized to us means that it's not corporate, that it's open source, it's in the public domain, and it's run on computers around the world. Those are core principles. And I would, basically from there, a few things follow, right? One thing follows is that you don't rely on a human being. Like, I'm not a CEO. I'm not actually even a coder. I'm a math geek. So I designed Bastyon. I inspired great programmers to work in it. I think that's my bigger achievement, that I was able to inspire these people who otherwise make a lot of money to work on a project that's very uncertain, that doesn't pay a salary. So, but having said all that, right, there's me, I designed a thing. They're actually close to 30 developers now. It's developers, designers, testers. It's a big community. But you don't have to rely on that community per se. What I mean by that is, you can always make a human do something. You can always force a human to, let's say Bastyon gets big enough and somebody says, Daniel, you have to ban this person. Well, first of all, I don't even have access to the code base. I can't ban anybody. That's to start with. But even if I could, the code is open source. So you will see it. People will see it in the code. Hey, there's a line that says this person is banned. It's like when Google messes with the search results, people don't see it. They have to guess it by the results. They have to infer it. Whereas in Bastyon, because the code is open, you would see it. What would happen then? Well, if this is egregious, part of the development team most certainly would turn around and say, you know what? We're going to run Bastyon on a different code base. The code base that is pure and clean, that fulfills the promises of Bastyon, meaning that we don't ban people arbitrarily. Right? There is moderation, but it's done by users. Developers are not allowed to write code to ban somebody or to shadow ban or to downgrade. It just doesn't work that way. So that follows from decentralization, because there are corporations that have open source code. So it is possible to have a corporate entity that has open source code. Most frequently it is not done because as a corporation you still kind of, the tendency is to own things. Like, for example, Android, right? Android essentially is mobile Linux. It was not owned by Google, but over time, because they're a corporation, they made it very difficult to use for other people. So in Bastyon, there's no such temptation. It's purely open source. There's no intellectual property and so on. So one thing that follows is you don't rely on a human being. The second thing that follows from the structure is that you don't rely on providers of computing power. People don't, they really don't understand and underestimate this problem. Social networking, especially when you talk about video, is first and foremost computing power. It's storage, it's processing, it's internet speeds. And so when you're a social network that's rapidly growing, this means that you have some servers somewhere. And those are not that difficult to shut down. Over the last couple of decades, a lot of the computing power, when you talk of big computing power, has been centralized. It's been owned by a certain number of entities. So it's very easy to shut down a social network. Like we had an example, right? Parler was #1 in the App Store. What happened? They needed to shut it down quickly. They couldn't wait for other ways to work, so they just turned off the servers. Amazon just shut down the servers. With Bastyon, you cannot do that because it's run on computers around the world, right? The other consequence of this structure technologically is that Bastyon is not reliant on DNS. So to explain to your viewers who don't understand, like basically the DNS is a service that takes a website name. Let's say you enter Bastyon.com or Twitter.com and takes you to the website, takes you to the IP of the website. That DNS is highly centralized.
It's the front end. Sorry, it's the front end that you're referring to then, hey?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the app itself. But this is centralized to the point where somebody in the world could flip a switch and most of the websites would stop working. Remember, Facebook was down a few months ago and a lot of the huge swaths of the internet were down. That is because Facebook has some control over the DNS platform. Now, you could see that lots of websites could stop working. It doesn't mean the internet is not working. Internet was fine. It's the DNS that wasn't working. So if you go to Bastyon.com, it may not work. But because we have the structure of decentralized nodes, that means that you can load an app. There's a desktop app on Bastyon, and that's really important. The true Bastyon is the desktop app, not the browser version. You do have Bastyon.com, but it's liable to be shut down anytime for any reason. But the app itself talks to any node around the world. So, for example, you could be in South Africa, and maybe in South Africa there are no nodes and you're not allowed to use it, but you could connect to a node in, Vietnam or France or Russia or whatever. So there's the idea that, again, this is a Bitcoin idea, that as long as you have global network, it is very resilient. It is hard to shut down. And so that flows from this technical decentralization, from having equal nodes around the world. Like there was if you remember a few months ago, there's a country called Kazakhstan, ironically where I'm from actually originally. Well, it was Soviet Union then when I was a kid, when I left for the States. But they had a big riot revolution type event. Do you remember that a few months ago?
I do.
Yeah, so they to quell the unrest, they shut down internet. But most
Mm.
of the time, they didn't shut down all of the internet because it's not tenable for, they can't do that. Their own communication rely on internet a lot of the time, a lot of critical things. So what they do is they shut down DNS, meaning that the websites don't work. We actually had a user who posted on Bastyon. They showed that they would go to twitter.com, facebook.com, Bastyon.com. Nothing works. It's just not working. They go into the app, the Bastyon app, and boom, they're able to get the information.
So
So
so it circumvents.
exactly, it doesn't go through the website at all. It's like you go to the Bastyon desktop app, it connects directly to the node, just like a Bitcoin node. So it has nothing to do with any domain, which is huge in today's world. Like
And
for
that's sorry for interrupting, but Gab
yeah,
and
please.
Twitter and Facebook, they don't use that kind of technology.
No. No, and
Oh,
again, I'm not like I don't want to bash people who do great stuff. Like Gab, I think is I think it's withstood quite a storm, and it's still kicking and doing well. Kudos to them. I think there are other platforms, I that are sticking to freedom. A lot of these so-called freedom platforms are not really sticking to what they're promoting, but I'm not gonna, they actually do censor and so on. But you could have a centralized platform that does stick to its guns. The issue with that though is like eventually
yeah.
it may be it may be stopped because
Mm.
if the Gap stopped as a corporation, then sort of the platform dies. Where in Bastion, it doesn't matter. You could
Right.
have different set of engineers pick it up tomorrow, make a fork in the programming language. You could create a fork because it's public and free. All of a sudden, like you as a blogger, all your subscribers would be still intact in that fork. Nothing would change. They would all get notifications. They would all see it. You could have different versions of Bastion. So it's kind of like Bastion is like this idea that it's just a bunch of butterflies, right? It's very hard to shoot at butterflies from a shotgun. It doesn't really make sense. So corporations are not like that. They can be very strong and resilient. They can be armored, and so on. If you use like military metaphor, unfortunate today, but uh, but they're still centralized. Whereas Bastion, it's like all over the place, right?
I mean, you're from the Soviet Union. You just mentioned it, and I didn't mention your name earlier, Satchkov, because I was going to keep that. I was going to keep that for now. But you're from that region, so you know all about censorship.
That's right. I mean, I know all about it. Also, you know, I, my father was a big student of history. He taught me a lot of it. So I studied history and I also lived through history. And I think people living in the world now, they sort of now they understand what it's like to live through history. But like, let's say, 10 years ago, they didn't. Certainly 15 years ago, they didn't. For a long time, especially in the West, it seemed like the history stopped. Remember that famous opus by who was it, Fukuyama or something like End of History? That supposedly history stopped. Of course, that's a joke. I mean, history doesn't stop, but it can go to sleep for a while. And so I lived through events where I studied history, then I lived through the fall of the Soviet Union. I witnessed all that. Then I went to another country and I started, I was a teenager, so it was very easy. That wasn't that difficult, but it was still difficult, right? So I saw history then and I witnessed what was going on. In 2008, that was a big change, right? And I'm seeing what's happening now. We're at a point of major turbulence and major sort of breaking point, right? The graph doesn't go smooth anymore. It breaks this way or that way. So I know what it's like when all of a sudden society changes and not for the better most of the time. And when I saw things happening in 2015, um, and I'm not, I lived in the States, I'm U.S. citizen, but I'm not particularly political in the sense of the two-party structure. I kind of lost faith in that a long time ago. So I'm not so much a partisan in that, but I noticed after the 2014, 2015 that I'm seeing people, regularly banned for opinions that don't seem to be, even that controversial. Especially when it started with the whole family thing, right? The having a mother and a father, and somehow is somehow a thing of a past or whatever. So I saw that, and for me it was logical. Like I know that censorship, once it starts, it's very, very hard to stop. It has to go to the end. It cannot tolerate any large part of the internet or of the opinion to be really free. Right? So that's why I believe that after having banned major bloggers off of Twitter, YouTube, whatever, now they're gonna go after alternative social networks. And it's not that hard. If they took money, if they took financing, they will be brought to heel. Bastyon didn't take any financing, so there's nobody, no stakeholders, no shareholders. It's a different story. So they will be brought to heel. And my opinion was that when I saw this, I was like, wow, I have seen this. I've studied this in history, how things are changing. I'm seeing a big
Mm.
change. I need to start working on something that can work for me and my kids and many other people to communicate freely if things go really bad. And you know what? There's an overlay to that. In the States after college, I worked mostly in what's called risk management. I did financial mathematics and I did a lot of mathematical models of risk. So I'm used to thinking about risk, possible tail events, extreme events. And so that kind of dovetailed with my background growing up in a communist country. And I realized that, this is going to get really bad. And now I will tell you that in many ways, it is worse than Soviet Union. Like in Soviet Union, there was a show, you had to show that you're loyal to the ideology, but it didn't go that far most of the time. Like in other words, you had a choice of silence. Let's say that you were prominent, musician, athlete, whatever, culture person. Uh, um, you could you could get to a very high level of recognition without bending the knee, so to speak, right? You could just avoid the topic. You could show some token loyalty, and you could still do your thing. Whereas what I'm seeing in the States and in the West, and more so even in Canada, is that's no longer tenable. You cannot keep silent. You have to bend the knee, and that's been happening, and that just reinforced that. That also helped us get really good programmers on the team that are, basically building this amazing product.
But how do you deal with the problem of quite blatant trolling? Like, let's say you've got actual hate or incitement to violence happening on the I mean, if censorship is so difficult now on Bastion, what do you do in those instances?
Well, so it's important to know that Bastion is not a censorship-free platform per se. Any censorship-free platform degenerates very quickly. You're going to have all kinds of disgusting content. I'm not even going to mention it. It doesn't matter. We all know what it's going to be. The question is not censorship or moderation. The question is arbitrary censorship, and meaning that when a small group of people using arbitrary reasons that basically that's what I want can ban you without recourse, and can also shadow ban you, meaning that they don't explicitly admit that they ban you, but for all intents and purposes you're banned. So in Bastion there is moderation. It is done by users of the platform themselves, and it's actually evolving. So the current version is revolved around experienced users, meaning like high reputation users being able to flag inappropriate content. But it's made very easy by the fact that there are currently only three types of content that's prohibited. It is pornography or pedophilia or anything of the kind, even close to that. Uh, Basically, that's not going to be on the platform, even in the milder versions, because we don't feel like that's a good use of the blockchain and so on. There's plenty of that stuff. Secondly, is direct threat of violence. And thirdly, is illegal narcotics. We don't want it to turn into a dark market or anything of the sort. Yes, it's censorship resistant, it should be, but we don't want to turn it into that. So there are three things that were agreed on from early on, and the experienced users are able to flag content, but only based on three things. They cannot say, "Oh, this is hate speech." Who knows what that means? Just I don't like you. You can't flag for any of those things. So yes, it does allow people. There is a uh, you can see trolls and so on, but that's that you have recourse. You can ban them. For example, you can block them and they can't comment on your posts. and you want, basically avoid them, you could do that. We're developing other ways of moderation, for example, block lists. So if you trust somebody and they block some people, you can apply that yourself quickly. The other thing that we're working on that is very close, that's going to be even more exciting, where right now the moderation is done by these flags of inappropriate content, but in a couple of months or even sooner, it will be done by jury of your peers. So in Bastyon, there will be a jury, there will be potential pool of jurors, and when something is flagged often, a jury will be called, and the jury will be called randomly, meaning that you do not choose to moderate this particular person. That's very important, because the biggest bane of the decentralized system moderation algorithms is the mob rule, where some users that get to moderate get together based on opinion and try to ban opposing opinion. In the new system, that is not going to be possible at all. It's hard to do now, but it's going to be impossible, because you don't choose to be on a jury. You're chosen to be on the jury. And then you vote. And then, you vote, and you have to have unanimous 8 jurors who are randomly chosen to agree that this is forbidden content. And only then something can happen. So there is moderation. There are numerous algorithms, but they're not arbitrary. They're open, and they're built to prevent mob rule.
Norman wants to know how do you define an experienced user?
That's an important point. Yeah. So right now, those are the users that post content and they receive high marks from other users who have, high reputation. Obviously, initially for the first year of the beta test, there were an early pool of users who got reputation without it, because otherwise it'd be chicken and egg. They got to a certain level of reputation by posting content, receiving high grades from others, and then that was like a seed kind of community. From that, it grew. So there are quite a lot of people now. You go to the platform, it takes right now probably 2 to 3 months of active participation where people kind of learn who you are. By the way, no personal information is required. Right? In Bastyon, you're not tied to a phone number or to a name or to a password or anything like that. Even email is not required, strictly speaking. So you go there as a complete unknown, right? We don't know who you are. Nobody knows. For all we know, you could be a bot. But then you start acting, and over time you get this reputation that's high enough to actually mark people. Now, in the jury system, this will not be only high reputation users. There'll be 2 other groups of jurors. There are kind of almost 3 branches, if you will, of jurors. One is this experienced users, so high reputation users. The other one will be appointed by bloggers with large number of followers. So like you already on Bastyon you're growing, and you'll be able to appoint some moderators, so people that you trust, and say, I trust you to clean this platform. Now, why do we believe it's a good idea to enable you, Jerm, to appoint bloggers? Well, it's clear. Your interests are aligned with Bastyon. You've already invested time. You have your followers. So you're interested in appointing the people that will not ban for disagreement. Because, look, if you appoint somebody who bans for disagreement, you're going to be ruining the platform for yourself too, right? So why would you do that? Now, you can appoint jurors as a blogger with a lot of followers. You can take it away. If they're not acting properly, you can take that right away and appoint somebody else. So that's the second pool of jurors. The third pool is, because there's a cryptocurrency called Pocketcoin, which is actually going to play a big role in the system. There are people who buy and hold Pocketcoin for a long time, over a year. They can also appoint some jurors. Again, why do we think it's a good idea? Well, because if you put some money into Pocketcoin, you're holding it for a long time, your interests are aligned with the network. It's not in your interest to appoint people who will, ban for disagreement. So from those 3 pools, jurors are collected, and then they're chosen randomly, and then they have to vote unanimously. We did some math, and I'm a math geek, right? I do this. We did some math that even if you manage to somehow corrupt a number of moderator accounts, potential juror accounts, the chances of you banning somebody for disagreement are virtually zero. We're publishing the article soon. We can, you can repost it. So we thought about this long and hard, this jury system is very, very solid. And also in Bastyon, it's important. The accounts are anonymous, which makes it much harder. But there's a thing that makes it easier. In Bastyon, you cannot sell an account. It's very hard to sell an account. If you know, like in Facebook, you can go and buy an account online. But in Bastyon, you cannot, because Bastyon account access is controlled by a private key, like in Bitcoin. This private key controls access to the account, and that's it. If you lose it, nobody can recover it. But it's for the same, at the same rate, if you ever sell to somebody access to that private key, you can never prove to them that you've unlearned it. And they can never know how many other people bought it. So that makes it much more difficult to sell an account, because imagine like somebody says, I'm going to sell you a high reputation account on Bastyon so you can mess it up. Well, it would not be worth a lot, because the other person would still have the private key. Then there could be other people who bought it, they have the private key, and then basically it would be torn apart. And then, of course, in the jury system, if a juror acts in a strange way, meaning, for example, it votes as a jury of 8, it votes always against the other 7, right? Or it votes a few times against the other 7, clearly it's doing something wrong, it will lose its privileges. So in other words, it's hard to compromise the account. It's possible, but it's hard to compromise a lot of accounts. But even if you do, the fact that the jury system is random makes it near impossible to ban for disagreement. So you will be banned. If you're posting pornography, you will be banned very, very quickly. People will agree to that. Yeah.
I love how bulletproof you're making it. It really appeals to me. But I mean, the elephant in the room is that it's an absolutely terrible business model for you.
Well, yeah. So let me explain that, right? So as a business model, I will say right away that for me, I have a lot of experience. I worked on a lot of major projects, commercial projects. It would be more lucrative to spend this time elsewhere, right? And so is for the other developers. But it doesn't mean that cryptocurrency enthusiasts don't make money, because we have a network and it has Pocketcoin. Now, there is no ICO, what's called in the crypto world. There's no pre-mine. But in every currency, those people who are early running the currency and helping developing it, they actually run their own nodes. So they make Pocketcoin. So these developers, they're not making any money now, but if Bastyon gets big, they could make some money. So it is not that they work for free. They work for free now, but they could actually own something very, very valuable down the line. And Pocketcoin is hugely important in Bastyon, because the other question that I think you might ask, or maybe jumping ahead, how do the bloggers make money eventually, right? Because you cannot create great content without making money off of it. I mean, it's foolish, because you can't work a full-time job and then come back and create great content. It's very, very difficult, at least on a regular basis. So Pocketcoin is an internal cryptocurrency of the platform. It's actually already, on exchanges or something. The way it works is that those people running computers around the world, they make Pocketcoin for running these nodes. And it's clear why, right? They spend electricity, they use up bandwidth, they probably, wear and tear on the hardware, and they get compensated to Pocketcoin. By the same token, bloggers who get a lot of recognition in the system, they earn Pocketcoin. Also, soon, again, within 2 months, almost ready, we're releasing what's called decentralized ad marketplace, advertising. It's almost like Google AdWords, where an advertiser could come to Bastyon, create a post, and tag you, Jerm, I want to promote it on your channel for Pocketcoin. You review it. If it's appropriate for your audience, all you do is you repost it to your channel, maybe add a few words, please, help this sponsor of mine. At the same time you're reposting it to your channel, you're getting Pocketcoin into your account. It's one transaction. So there's no need for you to talk to advertisers, to negotiate with them. It's all done through a smart contract, essentially. They post something, you repost it, and you get Pocketcoin. So Pocketcoin is important all around. It helps keep engineers motivated. In addition, yes, there's altruism involved for sure, but you can never, ever build a large project purely on altruism. It compensates nodes around the world. It compensates bloggers. And it's like you can actually there's boosting of the posts. You can move up the posts, and in the network. So there's a lot of things you can do with Pocketcoin. It's envisioned as this utility token, but the ultimate goal of it is to help the key value producers, which are bloggers, developers, node operators, to actually make money.
What sort of numbers does Bastyon have at the moment?
It is still not a large social network. I mean, I think at this point there's 360,000 registered users. It's adding about 1 to 2,000 users daily right now. I mean, note that because there's social networks frequently grow with advertising, right? So they get financing, and then so Bastyon doesn't raise money, but lately it has been picking up. And I believe that, and we could see that bigger bloggers are moving to Bastyon. They're, I actually spoke to a couple who are joining. I'm not going to name them, but a couple of big Instagram bloggers, because they can no longer, they talk about health. They're not even political, but they can no longer say what they think on Instagram.
Well, you can't say COVID or vaccine on any major platform.
That's right. And then the list is expanding. You have to do self-censorship on an unbelievable scale. So it is growing, and I think that people are starting to realize, and they're going to realize it very soon, that just because the platform is new and it calls it freedom oriented, and it allows you to post some content that's not allowed on YouTube, let's say, it does not mean that when it gets bigger, it will allow you to post that same content. Because remember, when YouTube was smaller, they also allowed a lot of stuff. When Facebook was smaller, it allowed a ton. When Twitter was smaller, it was great for freedom, right? So the corporation, it's like the gremlin. When it gets big enough, it is going to take it back. Not only it's going to take back the money, it's going to take back a piece of your freedom and a piece of your mind.
And we spoke briefly about this before we went live, but even though Elon Musk is trolling the whole world right now with his massive share purchase, in Twitter, it's pretty much flogging a dead horse.
I believe so, and for the same reason I described, a corporation has its own life cycle. A corporate platform has its own life cycle. You have to invest, and you have to take. And in order for you to take, you need to go beyond advertising. It is not enough for a platform to do advertising. The platform wants to control everything. It wants to sort of eat the world. So I know Elon supposedly wants it to go back to its roots, but you can't really undo all that. There's too many different moving parts, and it's not even about being even if you own much more of it. So I do not believe it will go back, purely because it's in a life cycle where it will not survive. Plus the environment is such that it will not survive as a freedom-oriented platform anymore. So I do not believe it will work. I mean, it's fun to watch, but in a sense, I think it's prolonging the agony of centralized networks. People who wouldn't normally believe in them start to believe again because Elon will save it, but I don't think.
Just to horseshoe back to something you were saying earlier about the resilience of Bastyon, because you must understand, this is a difficult concept for a lot of people to still grasp. I still don't know what blockchain is, and I love the idea, but only because I know that it's quite resilient to censorship. But I still can't wrap my head around what it is, right? But what happens if, say, Bastyon.com gets torched?
For the Bastyon itself, it doesn't matter. I mean, it will matter because new users typically go to the website first, so they will not see the website. But there will be other ways to spread the app. There's a desktop application for Windows, for Mac, and for Linux that you install it on your computer, not the phone app. There is a mobile app for Android and so on, but the phone is, a controlled device. It's more of your guard than your possession. On the computer desktop app, you'd install the application, and it works with. You can think of it almost like as a built-in VPN, but much more powerful than a VPN because VPN still depends on some entity. It's a direct way to talk to other computers around the world, that run Bastyon. So, and it doesn't matter in which country. You can do that anywhere. That's exactly like Bitcoin, actually. It is that's why it's very, very hard to stop. And we actually built a few things that takes it beyond Bitcoin in terms of censorship resistance. But that is why the desktop application is really, really important. And I believe that we will see for those social networks, let's say, that don't bend the knee, they will somehow be blocked on the DNS. Like you will type in a website name and it will not resolve.
How do you explain blockchain in the simplest of terms?
I wouldn't be explaining blockchain from a technical standpoint. There's no need for that. I think the best question to ask is, why? What's it for? What is the purpose of the blockchain? And in my mind, the purpose is really twofold. The first is that blockchain solved a major problem of you running different computers around the world and agreeing on the sequence of events. So think about money, for example. It is very important. The order is very important. So if I send the money to you and you send it to somebody else, it's important that it happens in that order. Because if the order doesn't matter, then I could send it to you, but I could take the same money and send it to somebody else. So blockchain solves that problem by creating an algorithm that keeps all these computers in agreement. And if one computer tries to cheat, it simply kicks that computer out without any central entity. Nobody's sitting in the middle. There's no bank or somebody who says, you're wrong, I kick you out. No, it's just an algorithm that runs on its own that allows to keep computers running in agreement. So this is, computing, this is like decentralized agreement. That's the first thing that it does. Remember, before Bitcoin, that was not possible. That was the reason why you couldn't really have decentralized computing, because in most important applications, you need to agree on the order of events. For example, you publish something, then somebody gave it a high rating. That's a sequence of events. We need to agree to that, right? Because you could have BitTorrent, right? There is torrent where you could just access files. It's decentralized. It doesn't need blockchain, but it has no sequence of events. It's just a file. You get a file. You couldn't rate it, subscribe to somebody. You need a sequence of events. Blockchain solves that problem by putting a lot of computers around the world in agreement. And I believe that's genius. The second problem that blockchain solves is actually the value problem. In all decentralized models, there is a fundamental issue, a problem that's called tragedy of the commons. So if you let's say we had a blockchain that fulfilled the first goal. It kept the computers in the agreement. Okay, they're all in the agreement. It's all working. But remember, over time, you spend money on electricity. Your computers wear. You have internet bandwidth, and so on and so forth. So you have a lot of expenses. You may get excited about Bastyon and run such a computer for a month or for 5 months. Will you run it for years that way for free? And the experience shows that no, you will not. In the tragedy of the commons, ultimately, all these platforms that are decentralized, they suffer from the idea that people take more than they give. Unfortunately, that's the nature of the human being. We want to take, on average, we take more than they give. So blockchain solves that. Not only it keeps the computers in the agreement, but it creates an internal financial system where you can reward those who are expanding resources. Now, when you run a computer around the clock to support Bastyon, and there are, by the way, 350, I think, such computers around the world now. That's an extremely powerful network. That's like 350 servers that you have to shut down in order to kill the network. That is exceedingly difficult to do all around the world. So, but the cryptocurrency that happens through blockchain, again, can compensate them. So to me, forget all the technical kind of, jargon and all this stuff. What you want to understand is why does the blockchain exist, what it solves, and it solves these two problems. And that is, when you read the original paper by Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever that is, to me, that's a hallmark of a genius. When you create something that solves not one, but a number, at least two major problems in one shot, that's really, really hard to do. That's like, they say killing two birds with one stone or whatever. So you have to be amazed if people think about blockchain as, hype and speculation, all that. By the way, I didn't get into Bitcoin very early on. Like I resented it. I hate even though I worked in finance, I dislike speculation. To me, when there's too much speculation, it's not for me. And then when I started thinking about censorship, I started looking for a model. What computing model could actually do this? And I decided to finally read the Bitcoin paper. And I read it and I was like, this is beautiful. It's really aesthetically beautiful. Not because of, just the math and so on, but how elegantly it solves such an important problem.
I love what you're saying. I mean, you're preaching to the converted. But do you think that it is a model that will take hold, or do you think it's going to just be perpetually suppressed by corporate interests?
If anything, we learned during the past couple of years that the idea that people are just passive, tools of history is wrong. I mean, we've seen over the last couple of years how people's initiative, resilience made a difference. Now, is the battle won? Probably not. I think we're going to see things get much worse before they get better. But at the same time, I believe that the uniqueness of the Bitcoin model and how we're using it in Bastyon, but essentially the Bitcoin core model, that it is very hard to suppress. I mean, over the long run, it's really, really hard because there's an asymmetry. There's a beautiful asymmetry in that in most areas of life, social life, the one with the most resources wins hands down. In blockchain, it's actually possible to have the little guy with smaller resources win because it takes so much more resources to overpower it. In other words, yes, there's going to be pressure and there is pressure on all these things, but really the model of Bastyon is not that difficult. You run some computers around the world. You have some programmers, of which there are many around the world, many good ones. You don't even need that as many as we have now, because now it's actively growing and developing. But so it is not that difficult for a group of people to run their own Bastyon. And I fully foresee this happening. I foresee there'll be many Bastions. So the idea, it will only be destroyed in a world where you can simultaneously go after many people with computers and with ideas in many, many different countries. Now, if we're living in a world where you could go across dozens of countries and shut down individuals, I mean, we have very serious problems, probably more serious than losing Bastyon. But short of that, I believe that this model will survive. Bastyon is already, growing rapidly. I think that in a few months, it will get to 1 million users, which for such a social network, it's quite a bit. But I also do think that the idea is taking hold. People are seeing it. People are gonna improve on it. They're gonna fork the code. Fork the code meaning make a copy. So I'm optimistic that that it will survive. The problem I see is that people will be fooled, lured by the siren song of, hey, we have this new Facebook alternative and it's freedom oriented.
Or Truth Social, or something like that, yeah.
Yeah, hey, or, Donald Trump started a social media, is going to be, or Elon Musk is going to, bring back Twitter from the abyss. I think that's a siren song. You better tie yourself to the mast and ignore it, because the idea of Bastyon is the idea of responsibility. It's also the idea of being, I think, smart. It's like fool me once, shame on you, right? Fool me twice, shame on me. We've been fooled more than twice.
Yeah.
So if you're fooled again, you can't have nobody to blame. Don't blame Mark Zuckerberg or whomever. Don't be fooled. But not being fooled in this world means taking some responsibility and saying, you know what? I'm going to use some alternative tools. I'm going to help them develop. I'm going to learn them because there's a learning curve. I'm going to get into it. But once you learn, you won't go back, right? You will not go back.
Well, it is taking hold. And I'm not going to put you on the spot, but like a video competitor that I use is Odysee, and it's pretty much the same concept, isn't it?
Yes, I think Odysee is very close, though I think that there is a centralized entity. And I'll be quite honest, I'm so busy, I didn't study it in much detail how the exact infrastructure works. But I think the concept is similar, and I think it's also open source, so that really it has some safeguards uh, against censorship as well.
It's very difficult to find fault with anything you said, because for the most part you're speaking the language of the people, actually, and that resilience is extremely appealing. But I think something else that's very appealing is the fact that it definitely has longevity, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's already been around for 4 years. Of course, it was very difficult to build. I mean, it's an order of magnitude more complicated to build this than Facebook, let's say. You could build the Facebook clone in 6 months or something like that, maybe even less. This has taken 4 years, and it's only come out of beta about a year ago. So it's proven that it can survive already. Now, has it proven that it can be massive and survive? Not yet, but it's coming. But I think as you know, most such projects die within the first year or two. That's just the nature of it, right? There's too many factors that will drive a project down, and Bastyon survived. Not only survived, the last few months has been, I mean, it's gone from 200,000 users to 360, I want to say in like 2.5 months or 3 months or something like that. So for such a network that's niche right now, that's a big growth with no sort of major money behind it, but it's going to be growing exponentially.
Where do you see it going?
I see it going to 1 million users, certainly this year. But I also see the forks of it. So we're not opposed to people taking and creating their own versions of Bastyon. They could create a different application to access the same blockchain, or they can fork the blockchain. In the end, the vision is that, think about like an app store. You go into the app store and you see a bunch of apps. You don't go to only Apple apps, right? You have a different bunch of different apps. Bastyon is open. What you're going to see is in year, 2 years, people will start forking it. It's very easy. We're going to make it even easier and create different apps based on it. You can have, different kinds of social networks, but not only that. The key is that the one private key that you use to log on to Bastyon will work everywhere. And that's very, very important for ease of use. So instead of logging in just to Bastyon, you will see a screen of a multitude of decentralized apps where you log in with the same key, where across the apps you can see your friends. So if your friends here, you can find that same person in this other app. So in a sense, you can think of it as a whole platform. So that's where I believe it's going. Now, before that, there's lots of things that need to be finished with Bastyon itself, but it is going to a place where I hope we're not going to need, an app store. We're not going to need a Play Store, because those things are highly centralized, highly gated.
Mm. Where does the actual content sit? Like, if I upload a video to Bastyon, where does that video actually go?
Yeah, so that's important. There's a node that holds the blockchain, just let's say like in Bitcoin. It has the blockchain. That node also has a companion database nearby that holds all of the textual data. So the textual data is on the same node in a separate database. But the hash of that data is written into blockchain. So every post you make, the post itself doesn't go to a blockchain, it would be too big. But it goes into this database and the hash of it goes into a blockchain. It's actually similar to the concept of NFT. We're not going to get into it because most of it is hype, and maybe we can do a separate call. I'm happy to talk about my opinion of NFT, where it's going. But actually, Bastyon, you can think of it, all of Bastyon is NFTs, really. Every post you make is kind of like an NFT because it's a content that's tied to a blockchain, and it's a unique piece of content. It's like a token, right? NFT is a token, non-fungible token. So the video doesn't reside on those computers because there are separate, so there are two things. There are separate video nodes that are just like that around the world, but also it resides on users' computers, so it's peer-to-peer. So it's like torrent. In the sense that all users that agree to have some videos, they can download a video, and they can actually be the host for it. So it is spread out among servers and users around the world.
Yeah, I've actually noticed that the videos on Bastyon seem to load quicker than say those on Odysee, and I'm comparing to Odysee because that's also blockchain based.
Yeah.
And I see, if I look at the comments, there's constant buffering issues on Odysee, but very rarely do I find speed issues on Bastyon. Why is that?
Well, I'd love to say it's because we're much smarter and everything, and maybe we are, maybe we're not. That's not the point. But I think at this point, I didn't look at their algorithms honestly. I will presume that they're professionals. I presume that it's because their volume is larger, right? It does depend on how many people are watching the video. Now, we do have videos in Bastyon that gather 100,000 views in a day. We have such a video. We have such videos. They're rare, but they happen, maybe a couple of times a week. There are plenty of videos that gather tens of thousands of views a day. So, but I do think in terms of just sheer volume, Odysee has more, and so that probably creates some buffering and so on. So I don't know what to say about that. I think that the coders that work in Bastyon are top-notch professionals, and right now at this point we have many of them. People are very excited about this platform. So as far as I know, we're doing almost the best that's possible in the circumstance. So maybe there's some issues with Odysee, but I would more likely say that it's probably the volume. And like if Bastyon had today the volume of Odysee, maybe there would be buffering too. We would have to solve that, and we'll solve that. So we'll keep it at that.
I ask this question to all my guests, so you have to also answer it. But
right.
But Daniel, in front of you, there's a crystal ball. What do you see? And just by the way, it doesn't have to be related to Bastyon. It's an open-ended crystal ball.
No, I know. But there's so many things that I see in the world related to Bastyon. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing it. So it'd be very hard to avoid it. And I'm not going to even mention, but I think the crystal ball is that things will get very dark. And at that point, humanity will have to choose if, it's not even about freedom per se, because people mean different things by freedom. I'm actually a religious person, for example, so most of what people mean by freedom, to me, that's slavery, but at least in the popular culture. I think that it's about, responsibility, actually, in a sense. In a crystal ball, I see a very dark time where corporations and other entities are going to use our desire for convenience against us, right? So that's what happened. People officially, I read a study where people officially now, grown-up people have an attention span when surfing the internet of less than the attention span of a goldfish. 7.5 seconds for a human, 9 seconds for goldfish. That's, if you think that you're free, whatever that means when that's happening to you, when they're doing that to you, when you're doing it to yourself, you're not free. So ultimately, I think people will come to realize that convenience and consumption that is put at the top of every value pyramid is dangerous for you. Ultimately, it leads you. It's like a mousetrap, right? The cheese is very, very, it looks very, very free in the mousetrap, but it's very expensive. So I hope that people will see that they need to stop looking for convenience and look for resilience, some other things. And if that happens, I think after that dark moment, we'll see much better days for our kids and grandkids. So, and that goes for many areas of life. Technology is certainly one of them. We're all addicted to a lot of things, right? Smartphones are highly addictive and so on. People need to take responsibility and take a step away. At least enough people.
Well, that's a good enough crystal ball analogy. Daniel Satchkov, It's been a pleasure chatting to you. God bless you and the work that you are doing. Really, it's phenomenal. I am a very happy user of Bastyon, and I'm always trying to, dare I say, convert people.
It will happen. It's inevitable in a sense for all the reasons we discussed. And I love your stuff. Thank you so much for having me. I love speaking to your audience, and keep up the great work.
My name is Jerm. This is Jerm Warfare, the battle of ideas.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please visit supportjerm.com.